Welcome to the world's most popular booktube channel.
Nathan, is this the world's most popular booktube channel?
It's a misnomer, a word which means a very wrong name. Isn't that
Ah, I
funny?
see.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. Just
hmm
ignore it, folks. So this is a booktube series, and we can treat it as a read along if you folks want to read along with us, and that's great. So what we're doing is we are reading through all of the books in the series, a series of unfortunate events. So there are 13 books, and we're breaking up each one into 3 different parts. So we're looking at chapters 1 to 4, 5 to 8, and then 9 to 13. So this is book number 2, or book the second. Is that how it's described? Yeah, book the
Yes.
second, the Reptile Room. And we are looking at the first 4 chapters of this. I have not read the series before. You have read the series. I am very clearly the wrong age to be reading this for the first time. So we get some fun interactions as a result of that. And you did read this when you were a kid. So,
Yeah. Yes, and we do have a sponsor for today's episode as well.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so our sponsor for today's episode is 46 and Me, connecting you with twice as many and twice as distantly connected relatives as the competition.
perfect. Yeah. 23andMe, like that's only going to get real relatives, the ones that are relative relatives,
Yeah,
like 46. What is it? 46 and
46 and Me. Yeah.
46 and me. Yeah, that's going to catch all of those ones where it's, are they? Are they?
Yeah, one of those things where if you go back far enough and then go forward again in a different line, then somehow you're tangentially related to literally everyone.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like all trees in a forest are still part of the same forest, right? So the family tree can be connected to another family tree. Just ask Count
Exactly.
Olaf. Um, all right, folks. Well, I hope you enjoy. Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time. All right, so we are reading book number 2, the first 4 chapters of book the second, The Reptile Room. I'm Nathan, by the way.
And I'm Tyler.
So I'm going to do the plot summary. We're alternating in each video. I'm going to do the plot summary for the first 4 chapters of this book. So before I get into that, then I suppose I should give the dedication in this novel. It is for Beatrice, my love for you shall live forever. You, however, did not.
Mhm.
That one worked for me better than the first one.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah.
yeah, because a lot of the humor is not working for me. But yeah, I did like that one. You,
Yeah.
however, did not. Um, all right, so we're essentially picking up not too long after the events of book number 1, which is The Bad Beginning. So the Baudelaire children are now on to their new family member. So Mr. Poe is driving them to this new distant relative that they have, Montgomery, and as he very
Mhm.
quickly tells them, call me Uncle Monty, and they are very concerned about meeting him because they think, what if he's as bad as Count Olaf, which of course seems like a bit of a strange concern. Like, how could somebody be as like another relative is going to be as bad as Count Olaf?
Right. Yeah.
But they're very concerned with this. They arrive at this beautiful house with these, you know, structured, like, I don't know, what would they be
uh,
called?
yeah, they are hedge design topiaries, I suppose.
Topiaries, yeah, like a topiary garden with a bunch of different designs for snakes on the
hmm
front lawn. And this is unnerving for them, but then they show up, and then Uncle Monty, they don't even see him at first, right? Because I guess he's behind the door. And
Right.
anyway, so then they meet Uncle Monty, and he's great. He's got a library. He's exuberant. He takes them to the movies. He gives each of them their own room, and everything is looking pretty good to the point where they're enjoying their lives now so much that they're just like, whoa, we're orphans. I guess things were better when we had parents, but this is pretty good, right? They catch themselves because they're having such a good experience living with this guy, and then you get these direct interventions from Lemony Snicket saying like, "Don't worry though, things are going to be awful soon enough."
Right.
Right. So you get these
Yep.
little reminders that this is going to happen, and then they have a plan to head down to what is the country? Do you remember the country that they're heading to?
Peru.
Yeah. Okay. So they're heading down to darkest Peru, where Paddington Bear is from, and
Yes.
so they're heading down to Peru, and they're going to be looking for snakes, and so they are given these different tasks. Violet is given the task of taking care of, mending these cages that they have to make sure that the snakes are comfortable after they've been caught and that they're functioning properly. So using her engineering brain. And then Klaus is given the task of reading travel logs and travel guides of Peru to make sure that they don't get lost and that everything goes okay. So they're certainly happy. And then did Sunny actually get the opportunity to bite the rope into different little parts?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, yeah, because Sunny gets to use her skills as chomping on things, so she gets to do that. And everything seems like it's going well, but the only odd thing is that Uncle Monty's partner in this expedition has just canceled, and so he has to hire somebody new. So he hires this guy Stefano, who shows up towards the end of these chapters, and then they very quickly realize that this guy is Count Olaf in disguise, but he then threatens, hey, if you don't call me Stefano, if you even mention the name of Count Olaf, then Sunny's going to lose a toe, more or less, is what he does. And we also get the very direct intervention from Lemony Snicket that Uncle Monty's going to die very soon.
Yep.
So that's basically where we're at. I'm not sure if I missed anything significant.
No, I don't. I don't believe so. Yeah, there is the reptile room, which has a great many different types of reptiles, particularly snakes, but also, I guess, also aren't frogs amphibians?
Yeah,
So...
yeah, but they're in there too.
Yeah. All sorts of scaly / slimy things.
Yeah, amphibians and reptiles and stuff like that.
And there is also the incredibly deadly viper, who does bite Sunny on the chin, but it turns out the incredibly deadly viper is a misnomer, and it is actually one of the friendliest snakes in the entire world.
Right. He kind of like hugs her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He doesn't kill her. He doesn't strangle her. He's a nice little pet. All right. So I don't know about you, but I didn't make any notes for the first couple chapters of this. I didn't start making notes until chapter 3 because it was pretty it's the techniques that we've already seen. I think he's doing a better job in book 2 overall than he does in book 1. Book 1, I think at times it's a bit clumsy with his writing style in terms of defining words and intervening in the narrative as a persona. Lemony Snicket, like Daniel Handler playing the persona of Lemony Snicket, I think it's a little bit clumsier in the first book, but this one he seems to be doing a better job of I think he knows the voice a little bit better at this point, which is good.
Yeah.
But it's mostly it's a pretty direct plot for the first 2 chapters.
Yeah. Yeah. On those, so I suppose I can go through those then.
Yeah.
On page 7, I really enjoy at the beginning of the first, or I suppose the second paragraph there, where Klaus sighed. I know what ridicule means, he said. He did not need to add, of course, that he also knew not to make fun of someone's name. And then this is the part that I wanted to point out. Occasionally, people thought that because the orphans were unfortunate, they were also dim-witted. I think that that's a really, really nice thing to put in there, because I think that a lot of people do fall into that trap of, just because they don't know how to interact around these children in general or whatever,
right.
Then they just automatically assume, oh, you don't have parents, so you must not know anything. And it's just very insulting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean I like that, and I think that it is. I did notice that when I was reading it. It's not. I just wish that he expanded that a little bit more because it's a good comment. But I think if he had, I think that's actually a good instance where he could have intervened as the narrator a bit more and explained a bit more of this insight into
Right.
human nature and society, where it says, because there's a lot of assumptions that people make. It's not just like orphans, because you look at that and you're like, oh, because they're orphans and people assume that they were dim-witted. I think it's more something like, because somebody's poor, then they assume that they're dim-witted, or because somebody's young, they assume that they're dim-witted,
Or
or
because they speak a different language. I
a
know
different
that's
language. Yes, thank you
yeah.
for bringing that up, because that's a really good example of it. Is oh, because somebody speaks a different language, they must be stupid. And
Yeah.
that's what happens all the time. So I just feel like it was a missed opportunity that he could have expanded on that insight, because honestly, um, and I know that he's kind of trying to be silly, but I don't think he's being silly with that, where he's saying
Right.
because they're the orphans, uh, because they were orphans, they must also be dim-witted. And it's like,
Yeah.
it just seemed like, well, nobody really thinks that about orphans, but people do
Right.
think that about poor people, people who speak a different language,
Yeah. The
young
one thing that
people.
Yeah, the one thing that drives me nuts with with people who are speaking to somebody who speaks a different language is that they somehow think that speaking louder
Louder will
will
do
help to get
something.
the point. That no, they speak a little slower maybe, but not.
Slower for sure, simplify your vocabulary, but louder
Yeah,
does nothing.
yeah. Did you understand that? No, I still don't know what you're saying.
Right, right. But
Um,
yeah, that's a good point. Did you have anything else for chapters 1 or 2?
yes, end of chapter 1 on page 10. Then Uncle Monty greets them with hello, 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 which is actually exactly how Count Olaf greeted them. So there's a little
Oh,
bit of a nice little play there on, oh no, maybe this really will be as bad as Count Olaf.
yes,
Uh,
that's a good observation. I did not catch that.
mhm. Um, Yes, we do get some foreshadowing as early as page 16 as to Uncle Monty's fate. Um, yeah, let's see. Uh, yeah, on page 16, the last paragraph there. It was strange his leaving like that. I was unlucky to lose him. Again, we have him using unlucky instead of unfortunate, and I'm not quite sure why he
Yeah,
chose to do that.
seems like another
But
missed opportunity.
Mm-hmm. But then he says, Uncle Monty's face clouded over, a phrase which here means took on a slightly gloomy look as Uncle Monty thought about his bad luck. Although, if Uncle Monty had known what bad luck was soon to come, he wouldn't have wasted a moment thinking about Gustav. Um, so yeah, just kind of
Yeah, I
I like
wish, and
that.
I'm sure you'd wish as well, that we could go back in time and warn him, but we can't, and that is that. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, he seemed to think that all is well. Yeah, I mean, he's it's not even, I don't even know that you can call this foreshadowing. I don't
Right.
know what else we would call it, but
Yeah, I think perhaps maybe like just a tease or something. Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, uh, because it's so overt. Foreshadowing
Mhm.
should be a hint. This
Right.
isn't a hint. This is just straight up telling us
Yeah.
something awful is going to happen. Because foreshadowing should be this subtle little thing where you might not catch it, so you have to be careful when you're reading it. This is impossible to miss because he's directly telling us. But I
Yeah.
don't even know what else we would call this
Mhm.
besides foreshadowing. It's very obvious foreshadowing.
Right. Yeah. And then on page 21, uh, this is all one paragraph, by the way, describing the reptile room. It fills the entire page, as well as part of the previous and next page. Um, but toward the bottom, yeah, just all the different descriptions of like the different types of. There were all sorts of snakes naturally, but there were also lizards, toads, and assorted other animals that the children had never seen before, not even in pictures or at the zoo. And then he goes on to describe these fantastical creatures. And I like this just because it does set up more that this is a different world, that it does not take place in our universe, because those types of creatures just don't exist.
That is a good point. Yes, I do appreciate that part, and you're right to point it out that it does establish that this is not taking place in our reality. This is some
Mhm.
whole other setting that's similar to our world, but it's not exactly our world.
Mm.
It's interesting. Do we ever get the name of the city that they live in?
I don't believe so, no.
Yeah, because I was thinking that I'm like, you're very obviously establishing that this is not our universe that we're occupying in this setting. So
Hmm.
why not just give us a whole bunch of different names? Because he says at
Right.
the beginning of the book, the stretch of road that leads out of the city past Hazy Harbor and into the town of Tedia is perhaps the most unpleasant in the world. It's called Lousy Lane. Then I'm like, why don't you just tell us the name of the city or this community? Why not just like, because he obviously loves having fun with these puns.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's this boring stretch of road. It's called Tedia. Huh? Tedium,
Yeah.
tedious. Like, so I'm like, it seems like he would be able to have fun with the city name as well and the community name, um,
Hmm.
but that is a good passage though to establish that, and I think most kids would catch
Right.
that we don't have animals like that. They're not just strange creatures that are, obscure, but just
Yeah.
they straight up don't exist in
Yeah.
our world.
So part of me wishes that that was actually in the first book, because the first book, it doesn't really establish that we're in such a different world, you know?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's my only thought on that.
I agree, and I think that would have been better potentially to have done that. I feel like the humor, this detached attitude towards the misfortune of the kids, like because it's all ironic and it's metafictional, where he's talking directly to us, making it very obvious. I'm very aware that I'm telling you a story and I'm the narrator. All of this, I think, would work better. You get pulled into it a little bit more if he did just establish this is not going to be matching reality.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Um,
Is
yeah.
so we can move on then to chapter 3.
Hmm.
Okay, so I've got a few notes in this chapter. So this starts at the very beginning of chapter 3 on page 27, and I I mean, so what he's doing is you get like this is a pretty major intervention from Lemony Snicket as the narrator. I'll just read it and then we'll comment on it. He says, I am very, very sorry to leave you hanging like that because Sonny just got bit at the end of the last chapter. Um, to leave you hanging like that. But as I was writing The Tale of the Baudelaire Orphans, I happened to look at the clock and realized I was running late for a formal dinner party given by a friend of mine, Madame de Lestro. Madame de Lestro is a good friend, an excellent detective, and a fine cook, but she flies into a rage if you arrive even 5 minutes later than her invitation states. So you understand that I had to dash off. You must have thought at the end of the previous chapter that Sonny was dead and that this was the terrible thing that happened to the Baudelaires at Uncle Monty's house, but I promise you Sonny survives this particular episode. It is Uncle Monty, unfortunately, who will be dead, but not yet. My notes are literally, I wrote sigh. Just, I guess this is funny.
Right.
That's what I have. I'm like, I don't know, like, even kids, I've got to think, no, this is not how a book is written. He's
Right.
he's like making it seem as though Lemony Snicket as the narrator is making it seem as though there's no editing, um,
Yeah.
there's no rewriting process. Oh, I realized I had a dinner party, so I had to end the chapter and then start a new one, and we're not left hanging by any means because you just read to the next chapter. It's not like we have to wait however long, like it's on
Yeah.
television or something like that. So I'm like, I don't really think it's like clever or funny, but I guess it works. It's fine. Because
Yeah.
he's playing with cliffhangers at the end of each chapter, right? And a lot of children's lit does that to encourage kids to keep reading, but then he's being very tongue-in-cheek about this, of like, oh, like, you must have thought this would happen, and here's why I stopped that chapter, and I didn't mean to leave you hanging like that. And then it's like, so I think kids should be looking at that going like, yeah, like, you're playing with cliffhangers, and yeah, this is funny because that's not how a book is written. It's not like just this spontaneous thing. I guess.
No, I mean, yeah, I do enjoy that, just because it does. I think it's a clever way of delaying the payoff of that cliffhanger. When kids could very easily just, keep reading, and I have been guilty of this. Just start reading the next chapter to find out how that one particular thread leaves
Yes.
off.
Okay, that's fair. I want to hear more. I'm going to turn off my video because I got to get my cat, but you keep talking.
Okay. So it's just I like that as a little moment. I do find it a little interesting that we get this little aside about Madame de Lustro, which I
Lustro,
don't, yeah, I don't think ever comes back or anything, but it is just I don't know. I like it as a little, delaying the payoff to the cliffhanger. I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm saying. That's why I put sigh. I guess this is funny. I see the
Yeah.
technique, and I understand that I am not the ideal reader for this. So
Right.
I'm saying, like, if I were editing the book, I would say, that's great. That's brilliant. Kids are going to love this.
Mm.
But the interesting thing about these books, and I've heard this, that they're supposed to work well for adults as well. And so far, I'm not finding this in the least. Like, a Pixar movie works really, really well for grown-ups.
Yes.
And in
Yeah.
fact, probably better for adults than it does for kids, because the adults are catching all of the jokes in a Pixar movie.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But these books so far, I'm like, no, this maybe works if you're a child. And if you loved it as a kid and now as an adult, then you're reading it and you're reminded of how whimsical this was and how delighted you were by this. But
Yeah.
okay. He does have, but just a couple pages later, then he does have an instance where I think the humor does work. So this is on page 31, and this is Uncle Monty talking about the different types of snakes that he has. And then, so he gives us ordinary descriptions that are supposed to be frightening or fascinating, right? There's a snake who can open her mouth so wide she could swallow all of us together in one gulp. Right? And he's given a few examples by this point. Then he says, there is a pair of snakes who have learned to drive a car so recklessly that they would run you over in the street and never stop to apologize. Um, so I'm like, okay, this one works because it's funny. And he is using a comedic principle here of give an ordinary example, and then give a really absurd example. And
Right.
the absurd example is not just there's a pair of snakes who have learned to drive, because to me, that would be like bad. That'd be lazy comedy writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a pair of snakes who've learned to drive. And you're like, oh, yeah, snakes don't drive. But then he's got two different tags on it that I like. So he's tagging onto this joke to learn to drive a car so recklessly that they would run you over in the street. And then you're like, oh no, they learned to drive, but they learned to drive recklessly. So that's the first tag. And then, as if that's not enough, and never stop to apologize. And then you're like, oh, the audacity of these snakes that they're not going to apologize after running me over recklessly in the street. That I'm like, and I like that he's just adding on to the joke, and it starts off absurd, and I'm like, yes, okay, fine. And then it's like, that's very absurd, and then it becomes extremely absurd by the end of it, as if that's the most offensive part, that they don't have good manners.
Yeah.
So I do think, and this is interesting with me going through these books because it seems to be doing that. I'm like, I get it, but it didn't work. That I still think is working. Like, that actually was surprisingly good. So
Yeah. No, definitely a fun moment there.
I guess I'll just go through mine for this chapter. On the next page, that he gives us. This is Lemony Snicket intruding into the story again. I guess I'll start from the bottom of 31, but he's talking about dramatic irony here. He says, there's a type of situation which occurs all too often, which is occurring at this point in the story of the Baudelaire orphans, called dramatic irony. Simply put, dramatic irony is when a person makes a harmless remark and someone else who hears it knows something that makes the remark have a different and usually unpleasant meaning. For instance, if you were in a restaurant and said out loud, "I can't wait to eat the veal marsala I ordered," and there were people around who knew that the veal marsala was poisoned and that you would die as soon as you took a bite, your situation would be one of dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is a cruel occurrence, one that is almost always upsetting, and I'm sorry to have it appear in this story, but Violet, Klaus, and Sunny have such unfortunate lives that it was only a matter of time before dramatic irony would rear its ugly head. So I don't really know what to do with this, because he's kind of playing with the idea. He's saying, I'm reluctant to use this literary device. But of course he's not. It's tongue-in-cheek. He's excited to use this literary device of dramatic irony. But the reason why I'm not sure what to make of this is that I think dramatic irony is certainly, because I mean, I've taught for a long time, and I've taught a lot of high school English classes, and typically even in 9th grade, most students don't know what dramatic irony is. And then the next year, when I teach them again, they forget what dramatic irony is. You know what I mean? Like, if you took a poll of even teenagers, even fairly intelligent teenagers, what is dramatic irony? I don't think very many would be able to give a good definition. So the reason why I'm not sure what to make of this is that he's playing with the definition itself, but I think that it works for me, because I'm really familiar with what dramatic irony is. So I look at this and I go, it's not exactly dramatic irony, but it's kind of funny what you're doing with it. But for kids, they're not going to catch that he's screwing up the definition, because he's wrong about this. To say it's not a situation of dramatic irony if you're in a restaurant and then you order the veal marsala and everyone knows that it's poisoned, and as soon as you take a bite, you're going to die. That's not dramatic irony at all. What makes something dramatic irony, and the reason why it's dramatic, is it takes place in a drama, typically within a play, where us and the audience are helpless to stop the character from doing something dangerous that we know is dangerous. In that case, people in the restaurant who know this, if they don't stop you from eating the poisoned veal, they're just monsters. They're not like, if only I could do something to stop the person from eating it. They just have to say, hey, it's poison, don't eat it, you'll die. Right? That's all they have to do. So saying they all know that it's poisoned and then you order it, that makes it dramatic irony. No, it doesn't. That's not dramatic irony at all. It's that, if you tell us, the reader, these are the ways that the characters are in danger, and we're tipped off to this, but the characters themselves don't know it, we're now experiencing dramatic irony. They're not experiencing dramatic irony. The characters in the book do not experience dramatic irony.
Right.
They're just experiencing tragedy. The only thing that makes it ironic, this dramatic irony, is that we know what's happening and we want to stop it from happening, but we're helpless. So you can have dramatic irony in a book or in a film if you have characters who know that other characters are in danger, but they are helpless to stop them. To stop them from getting into danger, then those characters could be experiencing dramatic irony because they are helpless to stop other people from getting into this dangerous situation for whatever reason, right? So I don't know what to make of that, because I'm like, on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, okay, you're playing with this literary device of dramatic irony, and you're telling people what it is. You're telling the readers, this is dramatic irony, and I hesitate to use it, even though he clearly doesn't hesitate to use it, and he's excited to use it, because it's a good device. But then he plays around with the definition, and I don't see any kid seeing him playing with the definition. I think they just assume that's what it is, which is, I'm not mad that he's miseducating children on this, because to be perfectly honest, they're going to forget anyway.
Right.
As somebody who's taught English long enough, they forget all of these literary devices like as soon as the semester's over, or as soon as you finish talking about literary devices, unless you remind them again and again and again. So I'm saying, well, kids will forget the miseducation that they get on the term, but I just don't see how that's even funny for children. It's
Right.
funny for an English teacher because I look at that and I go,
Yes.
okay, I get it, but I don't know how that would work for kids. What do you think?
Uh, yeah, so I agree, and I think that this is another instance of him trying to set up uh, like trying to set up who Lemony Snicket is in terms of what experiences
Yeah.
he has, and how the only way that he can, relate these experiences to his audience is through these grim examples. I agree that it's not actually dramatic irony, but the fact that the only thing that he could think of to describe this is food being poisoned and somebody knowing it and others not, then I'm like, okay, yeah, you're like, that's why do you always go toward death and grim things like so
Right.
yeah. Um,
Um,
so that's my thoughts on that, and I do think that it is. Um, I think that later on in the series, you'll see it more and more with simpler and simpler terms, where he misdefines them.
See, and I think that works when it should be obvious to the reader that's not even the definition, so it's funny
Yeah,
because he's
yeah,
giving me a false definition for comedic effect. But I'm saying he's giving us essentially a false definition of, or at least an incomplete definition of dramatic irony, I think, for
hmm
comedic effect, but I think that it's a complete failure for kids. Like they won't catch that that's not the complete definition. That's not a very good
yeah,
definition of dramatic irony. It is funny if you know what it is and you go, that's not it at all. That just makes people in the restaurant jerks. That's not
right.
dramatic irony. It's like, what's wrong with them? Why would they like just be like, they're gonna die. They just ordered it. Like,
Yeah.
so um, I guess let me just add in a different example of this. So I'm kind of jumping ahead. This is at the very end of chapter 4, but it relates to this with a literary device. So this is at the bottom of page 59. Uh, so he explains his own metaphor here. He provides us with a metaphor and then he explains what it means. And it kind of ties in with this use of dramatic irony. So it says, like, this is Count Olaf uh, threatening Sonny. I believe he's supposed to be threatening Sonny at this point. Um, I think that's the implication here, but he's got the blade. So it says its blade caught the light of the setting sun and it glowed brightly like a lighthouse. As you probably know, lighthouses serve as warning signals, telling ships where the shore is so they don't run into it. The shining knife was a warning too. So he's giving us, and to clarify, somebody's going to say like a lighthouse, that's a simile because you're using like or as, and it's like, yes, but all similes are metaphors. So there you go, folks. I'm just letting you know that it's a direct or an indirect comparison. And so in this case, then it is a simile, which is a type of metaphor. So he's saying, here's the simile that I'm going to give you, the metaphorical language, right? That he's got the blade, it catches the setting sun, and it glowed brightly like a lighthouse. And then he's telling you, oh, guys, I'm like these books act in a lot of ways as, you know, educational books in literary techniques and narrative devices. He is educating this young reader as he goes. Let's expand your vocabulary. Let me tell you what literary devices are, literary techniques, narrative devices. You should know these things to recognize them in stories and appreciate how they're being used. So it's interesting the way he's doing this. Again, like I said, with the way he defines words, I think it works if that's the first time you're hearing that word, if you really don't know what the definition is. But if you
Right.
do know what the definition is, or in this case, if you do know, like, okay, I know what a metaphor is, I know what a simile is, and I know why you said like a lighthouse, then
Right.
I don't think it works so well. I think it's just kind of insulting. Like if I was 10 or 11 or something like that, and I'm reading this, and let's say that I know what a metaphor is. I know that lighthouses serve as warnings, so I get it. Because it's such a funny thing. Because on the one hand, it's kind of like lazy writing. It's I just did something there, like a very writerly thing to do, and I want everyone to give me credit for it. You see, I used a simile. You see how like metaphors or similes can function in a story? Pretty clever. And it's like it only works if you don't take credit, but because he's doing it in this, facetious way, then it's like kind of distancing himself. Like, I'm not saying this to take credit for it. I'm saying it because you probably don't know what it means.
Right.
But,
yeah.
yeah, that's just it ties in well with his definition of dramatic irony, because we didn't really get that in the first book, but now we've got just in the first 4 chapters we've got 2 different definitions of literary devices, dramatic irony and metaphors. So I'm like, I can see as an English teacher how this could maybe be helpful in teaching kids this stuff, but I don't know how satisfying it is for kids. Like, do kids read this and then go like, I'm learning, I'm so excited. Now I know what a metaphor is, I guess some kids would like that, and I think others would just be like, wait, is he trying to teach me? Is this like school? I don't want that. Right? Because they're supposed to be kind of like edgy books. Like, ooh, you're not supposed to read this one. So you don't think this is an educational book.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree. Yeah. Good point.
The last thing that I want to say with chapter 3 is he does have another instance where the humor, I think, is working. So this is the letter that Uncle Monty writes to the children.
Mm-hmm.
And so he says, let me see. He says, Dear Bambini, I've gone into town to buy a few last things we need for the expedition: Peruvian wasp repellent, toothbrushes, canned peaches, and a fireproof canoe. So you should stop and think about that. And you're like, oh, okay, like that seems like important stuff, but that's going to be hard to find. Like a fireproof canoe. Okay. It will take a while to find the peaches, so don't expect me back until dinner time.
Yeah.
So it's a funny little thing of like, well, peaches are hard to find, but a fireproof canoe, like, they're everywhere. You can pop into wherever you want, you're going to find a fireproof canoe. And I think that kids would catch that comedy of like, that's not the one that's hard to find.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, the other instance too, and this is at like 36, so just the next page over. This is another instance of giving a funny example. At the bottom of 35, it says, he taught them not to give the green gimlet toad too much water, and to never under any circumstances let the Virginian wolf snake near a typewriter. Right? Like, I thought that was funny. It's like, whoa, what's going to happen if it goes near a typewriter? Like, of all these warnings, make sure that you don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and then such an absurd warning, and don't let that one near a typewriter. Like,
right.
Oh no, is he going to write ghastly fiction? Like, or is he going to get caught in the typewriter? Like, and he just kind of leaves it up to your imagination.
Right. I mean, it is also I think a very clever play on Virginia Woolf.
And
yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Let me see, because it's let the Virginian wolf snake near a typewriter. Yes. Okay. I didn't even catch that when I was first reading it. Yeah. As somebody who has read Virginia Woolf, yeah, that might be fair. People will hate me for that. Anybody is like, professors are like losing their minds. Like, sorry, I just not such a fan. Like, I won't get into it. I won't get into my critiques of Virginia Woolf because it's probably too controversial. But yeah, no, I would probably appreciate that. Don't let her near a typewriter. It's fine. She can write her books. I just don't want to read them and study them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. And I do think that's a really funny thing that is obviously going to go over the vast majority of readers.
Yeah, I was reading so fast, I didn't even catch it. So there's no way a kid's going to catch it. But now that I look at it, I go, ooh, that's a fun little dig at her. And
yeah.
Yeah, and it works on two levels. So yeah, that's a good joke. I'll give him that one. So that's all I really had for chapter 3, and then I can go. I've only got like one other note for chapter 4, and then I've mostly covered what I wanted to cover with these chapters. So I guess I'll go over that now. Um, at the beginning of chapter 4, this is another intrusion of Lemony Snicket into the story, where it says, one of the most difficult things to think about in life is one's regrets. Something will happen to you and you will do the wrong thing, and for years afterwards, you will wish you had done something different. For instance, sometimes when I'm walking along the seashore or visiting the grave of a friend, I will remember a day a long time ago when I didn't bring a flashlight with me to a place where I should have brought a flashlight, and the results were disastrous. Why didn't I bring a flashlight? I think to myself, even though it is too late to do anything about it. I should have brought a flashlight. It's interesting because to me, that's such a Family Guy joke. That's such a Seth MacFarlane type of comedic writing.
Yeah.
It's that you think that it's going to go in a certain direction and then it just veers off in this strange other direction. Like, couldn't you just see like Peter Griffin like saying something like that, where he's just like, like, no, I'm filled with regret. Sometimes when I'm at a grave, then I think like, and then you just see him like, he would say like, he'd be like when I went to like whoever's like funeral, and then he's standing there and he's like, why didn't I bring a flashlight with me? Right? Like,
yeah.
You see what I'm saying? That it's such a cutaway gag that you would have on Family Guy.
Yes.
Oh, it's going to go in this direction. We're at the grave of a friend. You're talking about regrets. So it's clearly, and because he set it up where he's interested in these macabre things, these very dark themes, that it's going to be, oh, I regret that, I didn't save the person when they were drowning, or I didn't, that he's going to be complicit in their death in some way. And then it's just some non sequitur of, like, yeah, when I'm visiting the grave of a friend, I'm like, oh, why didn't I bring a flashlight with me that one time, wherever? And it has nothing to do with the death of a friend. It just, it's an interesting thing because we haven't really seen that type of comedy up until this point. But I think that it works because he did use some misdirection up until this point, because you're sure that you've got a sense of his, like, the way his comedy writing goes, and then he veers off. And I said it before that a big part of comedic writing is the element of surprise. So it is surprising when I'm looking at that. I go, I'm sure I know where this is going to go, and then he goes in a different direction. I go, okay, all right.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's my thoughts on it as well. And I think the series overall, the first like few books are a little difficult to get through just because I'm like, yeah, I get it. But like once you get into the later ones, then he starts playing with all these things that he has established as his style,
right,
in these early books. So I think that, yeah, it doesn't work as well in these first books.
Okay.
But the further along you go, the better it works because he's subverting what he himself has set up.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that's good. That does make me optimistic about this, because I think it's going to work well after he has that misdirection, and to take several books to kind of set this up of, these are the expectations that you're going to have for the series, even though they seem like subversive themes, but then he's even going to then subvert that. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'll go with that. So I don't really have a whole lot else to say. I mean, like, obviously Count Olaf shows up, in disguise, and this whole thing about like Uncle Monty's going to die. I don't really know what to make of that. You can keep telling us this, but why should we expect anything different? Like,
right.
I don't see this achieving any sense of dread for kids. I don't know. Like, you read them when you were a kid. Did you feel a sense of dread of, oh no, Uncle Monty's in danger?
Like, no, I didn't. And yeah, it's, I find that they are, at the very least, unnecessary additions to let us know that he's definitely going to die by the end. And it's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, don't you think it would have been better if he didn't? If these books really were so edgy, wouldn't he not tell us this, and then it would be a surprise death?
Yep.
Like, to me, that would be more effective. But that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. I don't think that as a kid I would have appreciated this, because even like how edgy they are, it's like even that is ironic and facetious. That they're not. He's
Right.
saying that they are, but they're not. Like, telling us directly that Uncle Monty's going to die means that we're not going to be surprised when he dies. But if he didn't tell us at all and then it just happens, then I think it would be genuinely upsetting for some kids.
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah. Okay. So I did want to, we had uh, kind of mentioned it before, but on page 38, the second last paragraph there, um, of course, Violet said quickly. She paused and slowly said out loud something she had been thinking about for the past few days. I think we'll always miss our parents, but I think we can miss them without being miserable all the time. After all, they wouldn't want us to be miserable. I think that that is just a really beautiful moment. Um,
I
yeah,
wouldn't go
just
so far as calling it beautiful, but I agree with you that,
yeah.
like, um, because I feel like because these books are just so tongue in cheek, and this
Mm,
detached, cool irony that he has, which I've already said is just I like sincere. I don't really like this ironic approach to literature, but
mhm,
so I feel like it's hard to get anything that has got profundity or resonance. Occasionally he's achieving it. I do think it's good that she says that yeah, like we're always going to miss them, but we can do that without being miserable all the time.
yeah.
Uh, it's a good moment. Like I said, I would just it's not
Yeah.
set up well enough to for me to call that beautiful. It doesn't um, ascend to this beautiful moment. It's just kind of hey, things are pretty good. Yeah, they are pretty good. Oh, still miss mom and dad. Like, yeah, yeah, I know, but I guess maybe it's okay if we're happy. It's like, all right, well, this is good that they're trying to, and he's trying to, I think, also set them up, because in order to set them up as thinking, hey, we're okay. Like, he's got
Yeah.
to like cut their legs out from under them again. He's got to knock them down again. So he has to set them up
Yeah.
as things are okay. And yeah, even though we lost our parents, like, this is really the first time since the series has begun where things are kind of going okay for them, right? Because
Mhm.
at first it's like, hey, they've got this great life, they've got great parents, great, house, a fortune, all of this stuff. And then it's like, now they've lost it all. Okay, well, it can't be a series of unfortunate events if it's just like, then more bad stuff, then more bad stuff, then more bad stuff. He has to kind of bump it back up. And despite
Yeah.
all of this adversity, they still managed to find some happiness. Never mind, they lost that too. So
Yeah.
he kind of needs the moment in there to do it, um, to knock them down, which I'm sure is what's going to happen very shortly, because he's telling us that very directly.
Right. Yes.
uh, but yeah, so I mean, I think I'm good with these chapters, and then we can move on to the next four.
Yeah, just one more moment for me, which is bottom of page 52 into page 53. Um, I think again, like this really sets up what a different world we're in, where Klaus says, "We could get jobs," Klaus replied. "I could work in a library, maybe, and you could work in some sort of mechanical factory. Sunny probably couldn't get a job at her age, but in a few years she could." And I'm just like,
Yes.
what?
Yeah, and I mean, like, you are right. It does do a good job, and I caught that as well. We had talked about this the last time we were going over this. It's very much playing with um, child labor in the Industrial Revolution in the 19th
Hmm.
century, and so you said, like, they've kind of got the imagery of a Victorian city, and as part of that, then you did have children who would work, and that was a thing because there were no laws in terms of a minimum age that you have to be before you can start working, and so it was really just a matter of practicality of, well,
Right.
Sunny's just too young right now, but once she's old enough to be able to do something useful in a factory, then she could go and work in a factory. So it's definitely playing with this, and uh, it's funny because I think most kids would find that funny, but I don't think they would necessarily catch what he's doing there. And this is where it does kind of work for adults, where if you've got a good sense of history, then you're like, yeah, we used to do this. We used to say like, oh yeah, the toddler's not quite ready, but maybe like once they're 4 or 5, they could start being productive, work a few hours and
Yeah.
yeah, but it's definitely it's anachronistic, where there's these elements of temporality in terms of like what time period is this taking place in, because it seems to be the modern world with having cars and all of that,
And the movie
cars,
theater.
movie theaters, electricity, right? So you're saying it's not the Industrial Revolution, but then you have moments like that and you go, oh, but you still got the culture of the Industrial Revolution. So it's anachronistic in that he's just like blending these different time periods together, which is such a sign of postmodernism in general. But it's just, it doesn't matter if it makes sense or not, just blend them all together for whatever effect. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right, well, I guess we're done then with those chapters.
Yeah, moving on to see how Stefano said with a great amount of distaste for the clearly false name.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see what he gets up to. Yeah.
Yeah,
What
and we'll
happens
see
to-
how Uncle Monty dies. I'm presuming that it's going to be from the setup that we've had with the reptile room, something with the venom or snakes or something. I don't think we're even going to get to Peru. When are they going to get to Peru?
Good question. Yeah.
No, all right,
absolutely.
folks. Well, feel free to comment below, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.